Have you ever felt like you're trying really hard and somehow still standing still? Like you're running on a treadmill that everyone else pretends is a road. You wake up tired, you go to sleep tired, and in between, you do everything you're supposed to do. Yet something inside you whispers, "This can't be it." You see people winning, moving ahead, building things, living with a kind of calm confidence you can't quite explain. And you wonder, what do they know that I don't? Be honest. Does this feel familiar? Because here's the uncomfortable thought that most of us try to avoid. What if the problem isn't your effort, but your position? What if you've been playing a game where the board was tilted before you even touched the pieces? And that's when it hits you. Maybe success isn't random. Maybe it isn't talent. Maybe it isn't luck. Maybe it's something far more predictable and far more uncomfortable to admit. There's a small group of people, a tiny fraction, who don't just work harder. They live differently, think differently, see the world differently. And the rest of us? We keep trying to win using rules that were never meant to make us win. But this is where things change. Because once you see it, you can't unsee it. You start noticing patterns. You start noticing doors. You start noticing that some people don't wait for opportunities. They seem to be surrounded by them. Wait till you hear this. It's not because they're smarter. It's because they're positioned where opportunities naturally flow. Imagine two people with the same ambition. One is born into conversations about money, business, investing, growth. The other is born into conversations about bills, survival, and don't take risks. Both grow up thinking their environment is normal. One grows up believing money is a tool. The other grows up believing money is a threat. And neither of them chose that. So when adulthood arrives, one walks into rooms that feel familiar. The other walks into rooms that feel terrifying. Which one do you think takes more chances? Which one hesitates? Think about it for a second. This isn't about blame, it's about awareness. Because most people in the 98% don't lack intelligence. They lack exposure. They were never shown the map, so they try to walk the maze blindfolded. And here's the part nobody tells you. Opportunities don't appear equally. They appear where people are already looking for them. The 2% don't sit around hoping something changes. They place themselves where change is happening. Different circles, different conversations, different risks. While most of us are trying to feel safe, they're trying to feel stretched. I used to think I was broken because I felt scared of stepping into new rooms. Turns out I wasn't broken. I was just never trained to be there. And maybe you weren't either. So you stay in familiar routines. Same job, same habits, same people, same thoughts. Not because you're lazy, but because your brain equates unfamiliar with danger. And this is where the quiet tragedy happens. You mistake comfort for security. But comfort is often the thing keeping you exactly where you are. So the gap between the 2% and the 98% isn't effort. It's environment. And environment can be changed. But here's where it gets real. Changing environment feels unnatural, awkward, uncomfortable, almost wrong. Like you're trespassing into a life that isn't yours. So you hesitate, you wait, you overthink, and life quietly keeps moving. Type A if you felt stuck like this. Type B if you haven't. Now here's the part that flips everything. The people in the 2% don't wait to feel ready. They move before comfort arrives. They join rooms before confidence shows up. They ask questions before they feel smart. They act and let their identity catch up later.
That's a completely different way of living. And the moment you realize this, something shifts inside you. Because you stop asking, why don't I have opportunities? And you start asking, where am I not putting myself? That single question is dangerous, because it puts control back in your hands. And that's when the resistance kicks in. A quiet voice says, but what if I fail? And that voice has kept millions of people exactly where they started. But this next part changes everything. Because opportunity is only the surface. Underneath it, there's something even more powerful. Something that the 2% guard fiercely. And most of the 98% never think about. It's not money. It's not connections. It's not talent. It's education. Not the kind you're thinking of. The kind that changes how you see the world.
You are taught that education ends when school ends. Get the degree, get the job, stop learning. And for most people, that's exactly what happens. But the 2% never stop being students, not of subjects, of life. They study money, they study people, they study patterns, they study themselves. And the strange part? Nobody tells you this is even an option. You grow up believing education is something done to you. They treat education as something they do for themselves. Big difference. Because the moment school ends for most people, growth quietly slows down. You stop asking questions. You stop challenging ideas. You stop updating your mental software. And life starts running on old programming. Have you noticed this? You're using beliefs today that were formed when you were 12. About money, about success, about what's realistic. So you move through adult life with childhood assumptions, and you wonder why things feel stuck. Be honest, is this you, or just me? Here's the realization that stings a little. The 2% learn things that directly increase their value. The 98% learn things that help them survive the day. One group studies how money works. The other studies how to stretch a paycheck. One learns about investing. The other learns about discounts. One reads about psychology, negotiation, communication. The other scrolls for entertainment after work because they're too tired. And it's not laziness, it's conditioning. You were trained to believe learning is hard. They were trained to believe learning is leverage. This next part changes everything. Because once you see learning as leverage, you stop seeing it as effort. You start seeing it as power. Power to understand what most people don't. Power to make decisions with clarity. Power to see opportunities others literally cannot see. Why does this keep happening? Why do some people look at the same situation and see possibility, while others see risk? Because one person has trained their mind to spot patterns. The other hasn't. And here's the quiet truth nobody says out loud. The world rewards people who understand how it works, not people who work the hardest. You can grind for 10 years, but if you never learn how money moves, how people think, how systems operate, you're just running faster on the same treadmill. And that's exhausting. That's the kind of tired you feel in your bones. But this is where something inside you starts waking up, because you realize you don't need permission to learn. You don't need a classroom. You don't need a degree. You need curiosity and consistency. Just a little. Every day. The 2% read when they don't feel like it. They watch things that teach them something. They ask questions most people are too shy to ask. They treat knowledge like an asset, while most people treat it like a chore. I used to think successful people were just naturally smarter. Turns out, they just refuse to stay ignorant. That's it. And maybe this is the moment you stop doing that too. Because when you start learning how money works, you stop fearing it. When you start learning how people think, you stop feeling awkward around them. When you start learning how systems operate, you stop feeling powerless inside them. And slowly, quietly, your confidence starts coming from understanding, not hope. Which one are you right now, stuck or starting? But here's where it gets deeper. Education doesn't just change what you know, it changes how you think. You begin to question things you never questioned before. Like, Why did I believe this was the only way? Who told me this was safe? Why do I think risk is always bad? And that's when the mental walls begin to crack. Because you realize a lot of your limits were inherited beliefs, not facts. And once that realization hits, you can't go back. But wait till you hear this. Even knowledge isn't the biggest advantage the 2% have. There's something else, something invisible, something most people never even consider. And it quietly determines how bold you're willing to be in life. It's called a safety net. And not everyone has one. It's called a safety net. And if you've never had one, you don't even realize how much it affects you. Because when you grow up knowing that if you fall, someone catches you, you move through life differently. You take chances, you try things, you risk embarrassment, you risk failure. Because failure isn't fatal. But when you grow up knowing that if you fall, you hit the ground alone, every decision feels heavier. Every risk feels dangerous. Every mistake feels catastrophic. And this is where the gap between the 2% and the 98% gets painfully unfair. Some people are born with a cushion. Others are born with concrete. And that changes how bold you're allowed to be. This isn't about blaming, it's about understanding. Because once you see this, something inside you softens. You stop calling yourself too cautious. You realize you were protecting yourself. You were trying to survive. And that makes sense. But this is where things change. Because the 2% don't just rely on the safety net they were given. They build new ones. They create financial cushions. They save aggressively. They invest early. They reduce lifestyle costs. Not to look rich, but to feel safe enough to take risks. This next part is huge. They manufacture courage. Let that sink in. Courage isn't a personality trait. It's a financial condition. When you know you can survive 6 months without income, you speak differently in meetings. You negotiate differently. You quit toxic jobs faster. You start businesses sooner. You say no more often. Because you're not scared of losing your only lifeline. Think about it for a second. How many of your decisions right now are fear-based? Fear of losing the job, fear of running out of money, fear of being unstable. That fear shapes your entire life, quietly, constantly. And you thought it was just being responsible. But here's the part nobody tells you. The 2% obsess over creating options. The 98% obsess over protecting stability. And there's a massive psychological difference between those two. One is future-focused, the other is fear-focused, and you can feel which one you're living in. But this is where hope sneaks back in, because a safety net can be built, slowly, deliberately, one decision at a time. Spend less than you earn, save more than feels comfortable, invest before you feel ready, create small side incomes, not to get rich overnight, but to buy yourself breathing room. And breathing room changes who you are. It changes how you think. It changes what you tolerate. If this makes sense, say something. Because this is the quiet foundation nobody talks about when discussing success. Not talent, not luck, not genius. Safety. And once you feel safe, you start acting brave. But here's where it gets real. Even with opportunity, even with education, even with a safety net, most people still don't cross into the 2%. Why? Because of something far more powerful than circumstances, your mindset. And this is where the real battle has been happening your whole life without you noticing. The voice in your head. The one that says, play it safe. Don't aim too high. Be realistic. People like us don't do that. That voice feels protective, but it's actually limiting. Because the 2% have the same fears. They just don't treat those thoughts as truth. They treat them as noise. And that's a skill, a trained skill. So why does this keep happening? Why do we believe every doubtful thought like it's a fact? Why do we listen to the most pessimistic version of ourselves? Because you've practiced that voice for years. and you didn't even know you were practicing. But this next part changes everything. You can practice a different voice. You can practice a different voice. And this is where almost everyone underestimates what's possible. Because they think mindset is motivational quotes. It's not. It's mental reps. Just like the gym. For years, you've been doing reps of, I can't. I'm not ready. This won't work. What if I fail? Thousands of repetitions. So of course that voice is strong. You trained it. But the 2%? They trained a different voice. Not a delusional one. A useful one. When something scary shows up, their mind says, let's try. We'll figure it out. If it fails, we learn. This is interesting. Same situation, different internal dialogue, different outcome. And here's the wild part. At first it feels fake, forced, unnatural, because it is. You're building a new mental muscle, and like any muscle, it feels weak in the beginning. But if you repeat it long enough, it becomes automatic. This is why the 2% seem confident. Not because they were born that way, but because they practiced supportive thinking for years. They literally rehearsed courage in their mind. Now let's connect everything. They don't fear failure as much because they had room to fail. They built financial safety. They trained a supportive inner voice. This is the formula nobody explains. And once you see it, you stop feeling behind. You start feeling aware. Because none of this requires genius. None of this requires luck. It requires awareness and repetition. You can start today. Not by quitting your job, not by taking insane risks, but by changing tiny patterns. Save a little more. Spend a little less. Try one small, scary thing. Catch one negative thought and replace it. That's it. That's how the shift begins. Slow, boring, unimpressive, but powerful. And here's the truth most people won't like. The 2% didn't change their life in one big moment. They changed it in 500 small ones. That's why it looks invisible from the outside, but unstoppable from the inside. And if you're still reading this, you're already closer than you think. Because most people never question why they feel stuck. You did. That's rare. That's the first sign. So here's what matters now. Don't try to become the 2% overnight. Just stop thinking like the 98% today. That's the only step. One thought, one decision, one action, repeated, until it becomes who you are. And one day, without noticing the exact moment it happened, you'll realize something strange. You're calmer, braver, less afraid, more willing, and you won't feel like you changed. You'll feel like you finally became yourself. That's how the shift happens. Quietly, gradually, then all at once. And that's why 2% succeed. Not because they're special, but because they built the conditions that allow success to happen. And now, you know how.